Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the GCF Global Programming Conference session on forest and land use. My name is Ayaka Fujiwara. I'm Climate Investment Specialist at the Private Sector Facility of the GCF, and I'm delighted to moderate this very interesting discussion. This session will address how to mobilize the financial resources necessary to achieve a paradigm shift towards zero emissions, as well as sustainable forestry and land use. For the benefit of participants on site and those of you who are joining us on Hoover, I'd like to remind you that you are welcome to submit your questions online. And we'll also have a Q&A session at the end to take your live questions. Now, moving on to the session context. Deforestation and forest degradation are both a cause and a consequence of climate change, while forest protection, forest restoration, and sustainable forest management are powerful solutions to climate change. It is said that forests can pull 11 billion metric tons of carbon from the atmosphere, which is about 1/3 of mitigation efforts needed to achieve the Paris Agreement. Despite the central role, forest protection, forest restoration, and sustainable forest management are critically underfinanced, and the financing gap is set to be billions of US dollars. GCF has approved close to 1.6 billion of worth of projects in forest and land use, but on its own, it is way too little. We need to continue playing a catalytic role in markets and domestic budget to mobilize a much larger financial resources. So today we have a team of eminent panelists with me, and I will be keeping them on their toes to keep this discussion very interesting. And also so that we can raise the public and private finance necessary to achieve a paradigm shift in forest and land use. Now, I have the distinct honor of introducing you to the panelists of this session. So left to me, Dr. Benjamin Singer is our Senior Forest and Land Use Specialist here at the Green Climate Fund. Ben, welcome on board. Ben brings along over 15 years of experience in the design of transformational projects and programs on forest, land use, and ecosystem. He has worked also in the United Nations Forum on Forest and at the UN Secretary General's office. Beside him is Mr. Yusuke Taishi. Yusuke, welcome on board. He's a senior technical advisor for climate change adaptation in the Nature, Climate, and Energy team in UNDP. Yusuke brings along over 17 years of experience with the most vulnerable population, and in UNDP, he managed a climate change adaptation portfolio of over 300 million, spanning over 18 countries, mainly in the Asia-Pacific region. And next to him, last but not least, Mr. Anton Willem. He's the CEO of Profonampe, Peru's environmental fund. Anton, welcome on board. Anton has 20 years of experience focused on public policy, territorial development, innovation, and environment. As CEO of Profonampe, he is responsible for designing and implementing strategies to attract and channel more and greater financial resources in favor for the environment. Now, I would like to move on to each expert presentation. So first up is you, Ben. So Ben, how is our portfolio looking? Are we now receiving the projects that we'd like to see?
Thank you very much, Ayaka. If we could have the first presentation up, please. Right, welcome once again to this session on forest and land use. And as everyone knows, forest and land use is one of the 8 result areas of the GCF. And so we've dedicated the whole afternoon to the different result areas. And you're in the right room because, of course, forest and land use is by far the most important of the result areas. Here's a dashboard of our portfolio in terms of forest and land use. As you can see, on the left, we have the distribution of projects by size, and we have a nice curve here with the middle being focused on medium-sized projects, so that this is where we're wanting to go, so that's looking good. If you see the distribution by region, you see that most of the funding has actually been allocated to Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, this is partly due to the fact that this is a region that has secured most of the RED Plus results-based payments. So that has skewed it towards that region. But we see that otherwise, Asia Pacific and Africa have also received a fair amount of funding. And Eastern Europe has received a very small amount of funding, which to some extent is understandable given the smaller size and the fact that it's middle-income countries. But there is definitely room to improve and room to focus more on Eastern Europe. And if you see at the bottom here, the distribution by sector and entity type, you'll see that the vast majority of financing in forest and land use has gone to public projects and to international accredited entities. So here there's definite room for improvement to expand our portfolio with direct access entities and with private projects. Now, for those who are following the session earlier today on ecosystems and ecosystem services, you will have seen a very similar version of this slide. This slide actually brings together our portfolio on ecosystems and ecosystem services and forest and land use. And the reason for that is that we very much regard these two result areas as two sides of the same coin. Forest and land use is a mitigation result area, ecosystems and ecosystem services, an adaptation result area. But ultimately, there's a lot of synergy between the two. And many projects that come to GCF, many proposals that come to GCF cover both ecosystem services for their adaptation part and forest and land use for their mitigation part. So what we see here is, and that helps answer your question, Ayaka, of are we seeing what we want to see? Well, yes, to a large extent, yes, we're seeing a lot of very relevant proposals come in. But what we're also seeing is that we have a certain number of gaps. And if you look at this graph here, you'll see that the majority of proposals are in the lower left-hand side of this graph. Those that rely primarily on grants as a financial instrument and that are land-based. So we're looking primarily at agricultural and forest projects. There is definite room for improvement, room to move more into the coastal areas and open oceans. And as well, there's space to move into diversify in terms of financial instruments. So not only grants, but also concessional debt, equity and guarantees. And this is a challenge for forest and land use to be able to unlock, especially private capital, but we do have these financial instruments at hand to do so. Again, when we lump together forest and land use and ecosystem services, we do see that there's a range of solutions and opportunities that lie ahead of us. And here we have a strong convergence between scientific priorities and political priorities. In terms of scientific priorities, we see that the strongest comparative advantages of forests and land use lie in the fact that they are cross-cutting. They deliver both on mitigation and adaptation, and in addition to which, they can deliver on a wide variety of co-benefits, biodiversity, livelihoods, hydrological cycles, etc. So that is one of the greatest strengths of forest and land use, and we need to capitalize on that. Other scientific priorities point towards methane, peatlands, the need to work more on forest fires, but also to move towards coastal areas and oceans, as I was mentioning. And this is also reflected in political priorities. We saw the Ocean Summit just a few months ago. This is a high political priority at the moment. We have other political priorities such as landscape restoration, conservation, which in some countries has a lot of bipartisan support, and also a push for market creation and for diversifying financial instruments. So in terms of themes, we generated a list of themes here, which reflect some of the priorities of forest and land use and ecosystem services for the months and years to come for the GCF. And we see that most of them tick off at least several of the paradigm shifting pathways that we see in these two result areas. On the left-hand side, the ecosystem-based management, coastal and marine ecosystems, and terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems. Those are the paradigm shifting pathways of ecosystems and ecosystem services. And then restoration, conservation, and sustainable management are the paradigm shifting pathways of forest and land use. And put together, we see that there's this short list of topics, of domains in which we would encourage the submission of proposals. And to round off this, this presentation, I just wanted to zoom in on one of these themes, which is deforestation-free supply chains, and just illustrate the diversity of entry points for the GCF in this particular topic. Now, on this slide, you've got the four stages that is, or the four prongs that are used by GCF time and again. But it works well for deforestation-free supply chains. You have the first stage, which is what some would call readiness, transformational planning and programming. It's about helping align consumer and producer market regulations. It's about promoting certification. It's laying the basis upon which we can then support deforestation-free supply chains and commodities. And this will primarily rely on grants, including through the readiness program of the GCF. The second phase, the second stage, is catalyzing climate innovation. And this is really about testing models, testing deforestation-free supply chain models, kicking the tires on these models and seeing if they actually work in pilot contexts. And again, we'll primarily rely on grants in this particular stage. But that brings us on to the third stage, which is mobilizing financing at scale. Once these models have been tested and proven, how do we scale them up? And the best way of scaling them up is crowding in finance. And it can be public domestic finance, but it can also be private finance. And that is where the full range of financial instruments that GCF has at its disposal is most useful. Loans, equity and guarantees. And the last phase is once we've shifted the needle, once we've scaled up these new models, we want to maintain, we want to stay on this new paradigm shift. We want to stay on this new low emissions, resilient, sustainable track. How do we do that? It's by ensuring that at domestic level, the financial institutions, public development banks, central banks have the leverage capacity to maintain us on this new track. And again, loans and equity can come in very useful here. So this is just an example of the diversity of proposals that would fall into this large bucket called deforestation-free supply chains, which is going to be a priority for the years to come in forest and land use for GCF, along with the others that were shortlisted in the previous slide. Thank you very much. Ayaka, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. This is definitely very interesting, and it's nice to know the practical way forward on how our own GCF model blends well with the existing deforestation-free supply chain initiatives. Our next presenter is going to be Yusuke. It's going to be Yusuke's presentation on blue carbon and blue economy now. Yusuke, so blue carbon is raising a lot of curiosity. How can we attract private finance in blue carbon in this very new market? Over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to GCF for giving us this opportunity to present the work of UNDP, but moreover, for the long-term partnership that we're building between the two agencies. I'll start my presentation by directly answering Ayaka's question, I think one of the immediate opportunities that's available for private entities for investments in blue carbon is voluntary carbon market, but not without addressing some gaps and challenges that still exist with this mechanism. So through my presentation, I will be explaining how voluntary carbon markets can be one of modalities of investments, but also I'll be touching on existing gaps and challenges. Okay, so I'll start my presentation with this picture that I'm sure you're already familiar with, but I think it's still important to set the stage by providing a summary of the status of the climate crisis that we're facing. So we all know that we're on a trajectory to a 2-degree warming world sometime this year, and climate financing that's available is nowhere near what's actually needed. And only a fraction of available climate finance is going to the so-called nature-based solutions. And now let's turn our attention to coastal ecosystems. Here I'm showing 3 examples of coastal ecosystems: mangroves, coral reefs, and seagrasses, but there are more, salt marshes, beach forests, and so on. But when we look at these 3 examples of coastal ecosystems, they actually offer tremendous amounts in terms of both mitigation and adaptation benefits. But at the same time, they're under tremendous threat from human activities, including climate change, but also from development pressures in coastal areas. So now let's turn to the definition of blue carbon. Basically, blue carbon is the carbon that's stored in coastal areas. And here, what's really important to recognize is it is interdependence of these coastal ecosystems that make the coastal ecosystem really effective absorption for blue carbon. We should not be looking at just mangrove forest or seagrass beds as source of carbon sequestration. It is in healthy interactions among these ecosystems that make blue carbon really possible. So that's one of the key takeaway messages from my presentation. So maintaining the healthy coastal ecosystem is really critical for us to when we are exploring the potential of blue carbon. Now, here I'm showing you some positive signs that we are starting to see in terms of private sector financing coming into the blue carbon landscape. Some of the big private sector entities like Apple is showing interest in investing in blue carbon. Also, some countries have recognized blue carbon as a potential priority areas in their NDCs, including USA, Australia. Also, there's an increasing clarity about what blue carbon really is. I think it's still a nascent concept, and there is a lot of studies and reports coming out to provide clarity about the game of the rule. And third, there are emerging financing mechanisms, including voluntary carbon markets, as I mentioned earlier, but also impact investments and some other financing mechanisms that can potentially support blue carbon. Now here I'm giving you 2 examples from the work that UNDP is supporting. One is from Cuba. It's called the Mi Costa project, financed by GCF. And here we are working with the government of Cuba to rehabilitate and put in better management mangrove forest, seagrasses, and coral reefs along, 1,300 kilometers of coastlines. in this project, we're not necessarily bringing in private sector financing. But the reason why I wanted to give you this example is twofold, basically. Number one, it's one of the few GCF finance projects where there's a strong recognition of blue carbon. So that alone is, I think, worth sort of showing to you as a good example. And the second reason why I wanted to show this to you is because it's not just rehabilitation of mangrove forests and seagrass beds, but the project also invests in the capacity building of local communities, awareness raising, and sort of nurturing local communities as a better stewards of these local coastal resources. Because without the participation of communities, anything that we do to actually capture blue carbon will be short-lived. These communities need to be better stewards so that they can look after these coastal ecosystems in a long run. And this is a good, I guess, exemplary case where we are combining those technical assistance and support on coastal ecosystems. And in my second example, which I'm about to show you, also brings together these two dimensions. So second example is a Global Fund for Coral Reefs. Ben included this in his slide as well. There was an earlier session that talked about this initiative, and I'm coming back to this initiative again because I think it's worth revisiting as a success case. There are dual objectives in Global Fund for Coral Reef. One is to facilitate innovative financing for what we call reef positive investments. And the second objective is to harness the power of coral reef to promote local adaptation in local communities. And how we are using GCF funding to crowd in private sector financing is really innovative and interesting. When we say reef positive investments, we are talking about, for example, ecotourism or wastewater treatment or marine protected area management. Those initiatives that may generate revenue, but these are unfamiliar markets for many investors. And that's why we are partnering with GCF and putting in concessional financing or guarantee to de-risk these investments so that investors feel more confidence in coming into the market. And the next diagram shows, actually right-hand side of this diagram shows what I just talked about. You can actually go to the website of GFCR to see this in detail. But this is where de-risking GCF concessional loans are being used to de-risk investments in reef positive enterprises, many of which are small to medium size. But what we cannot forget is the left-hand side of the diagram as well. That represents the technical assistance that I was talking about in the form of capacity building of local communities, awareness raising, putting in place a better governance system for improved management of coastal ecosystems. Without those types of support, we are not able to maximize the potential of blue carbon. So that's a really important message that I would like to stress in my presentation. So I'll end my presentation with this slide by showing some of the challenges that still exist. The outcomes from investing in mangrove management, seagrass bed rehabilitation, these are long-term type of outcome. You know, we would not have immediate quick wins from these type of investments. And we need to have a stronger monitoring capacity, which is still lacking in many areas. So that needs to be strengthened. And also one important gap that still exists is this ownership of blue carbon. when private sector entities come in and assist local communities in promoting carbon sequestration through mangroves or seagrasses, where does this carbon belong? Does it belong to the community? Does it belong to the country? Does it belong to the investor? I think that's still an unanswered question. And also there's of course, ongoing discussion about Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. That kind of sets the stage for voluntary carbon markets and other market mechanisms. And lastly, it's really critical to see, areas that are often unaccounted in the computation of blue carbon benefits, like community empowerment, capacity building, that's often forgotten, but really critical to make this whole enterprise a success. So I'll finish my presentation here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yusuke. Indeed, it's very nice to see global funds of coral reef, one of our approved projects as an example. 100% agree that the grant component that enables technical assistance and capacity development was a necessary factor to crowd in the private sector financing in blue carbon. Okay, now we're going to move on to the last presentation before we move on to the panel discussion. So next up is Anton. I would like to remind you that Anton will be speaking in Spanish. So now is a very good time to pull out that device for the translation in your ears. And without any ado, Anton, over to you.
Buenas tardes a todos. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad de contarles un poco en este espacio sobre usos de suelo y bosques, sobre el trabajo que venimos haciendo en Profonampe. Profonampe es un fondo ambiental privado que tiene prácticamente 30 años y nos constituimos como una necesidad de movilizar recursos para atender los desafíos de la agenda ambiental, ¿no? Nuestro propósito, y ese es un propósito compartido por todo el equipo de Profonampe, es promover la sostenibilidad de la vida conectando a la humanidad con el medio ambiente. Y en ese propósito, una de las razones por las que estamos acá es que desarrollamos proyectos innovadores colaborativos que cumplen con unos estándares fiduciarios tan exigentes que nos han valido hoy ser parte de las entidades de acceso directo nacionales en el Fondo Verde y en el Fondo de Adaptación. Y un poquito para contarles también qué cosa hacemos. Al día de hoy, Profonampe es una entidad que trabaja en 24 regiones en el Perú y ejecuta 17 proyectos por un valor de casi 190 millones de dólares. Significa que en el territorio peruano, Perú, Sudamérica, ¿no?, es uno de los actores principales en el trabajo. Y ese trabajo que tenemos con estos diversos proyectos es el que nos permite también traer conocimientos y aprendizajes que pueden servir para el diseño de modelos de intervención a escala nacional o regional, que son los que se discuten muchas veces en foros como estos, ¿no? Y uno de los principales desafíos y la razón por la que también estamos en este panel tiene que ver con la inmensa presión que se está generando sobre nuestros recursos naturales y en particular sobre los bosques. En el caso peruano, somos el segundo país con mayor cobertura de bosques amazónicos y eso ha hecho que nuestra orientación y búsqueda de recursos se enfoque principalmente en proyectos que atienden la agenda de cambio de uso de suelos. ¿Y por qué es importante enfocarnos en proyectos que tengan que ver con bosques, con cambios de uso de suelo, con presiones que está generando la población y las necesidades en el territorio. Producto de ese conocimiento, les quiero contar hoy dos iniciativas que Profonampe viene, por un lado trabajando y por el otro lado diseñando. Pero antes de entrar en esas iniciativas, quiero contarles por qué estamos trabajando en ello, ¿no? Y unas 5 láminas más adelante vamos a conocer a Segundo Canchari. Segundo Canchari es un poblador de Musacaruza en el Datem del Marañón. Datem del Marañón es una provincia en Perú, en la región de Loreto. Y la carretera más cercana al pueblo de Segundo está a 14 horas en lancha. ¿Qué significa esto? Que primero tiene que navegar 14 horas por el río para poder llegar a un centro poblado que se conecta con el resto del territorio nacional. Entonces, cuando uno está pensando en todos estos fondos y la emergencia climática y cómo llegamos con los recursos hacia el territorio, tenemos que poder conocer historias como las de Segundo, que a través de proyectos que ejecutan organizaciones como Profonampe y aliados de Profonampe en el territorio, están transformando su vida, pero están generándole oportunidades. En el ecosistema de financiamiento para esas oportunidades, uno de los desafíos que se presentan es cómo canalizamos recursos de manera efectiva al territorio. Y ahí hemos estado trabajando en el diseño de una intervención que esperamos que el Fondo Verde pueda acompañarnos, pero básicamente lo que buscamos con esta intervención de tener una facilidad de bionegocios es poder lograr dos grandes objetivos. El primero, que la regulación nacional permita que este tipo de proyectos se ejecuten de manera más constante y con una mayor escala. Y para eso fortalecemos mucho a las autoridades nacionales. Pero por el otro lado, tenemos que generar un mecanismo permanente de recursos que puedan ser accesibles para bionegocios y emprendimientos vinculados al aprovechamiento sostenible del bosque. Esta facilidad de bionegocios es una propuesta que hoy podría ser financiado por el Fondo Verde, pero que en realidad debería ser canalizado a través de cualquier entidad que quiere movilizar recursos en favor de la conservación y aprovechamiento sostenible. Y de hecho puede ser una de las ventanas más interesantes para que el capital privado fluya hacia emprendimientos ahí en donde se requiere, ¿no? ¿Qué cosa busca el proyecto? Básicamente tener un componente de regulación que le permita entonces al Estado peruano poder cumplir con sus compromisos globales, con sus políticas nacionales y también las políticas ambientales de los acuerdos que ha firmado. Y por el otro lado, generar capacidades para llegar directamente a emprendimientos como los que tiene Segundo, o emprendimientos como los que tiene Balbina, que es una mujer kandoshi que también tiene un negocio a partir de su uso de los recursos. Para este segundo componente, sabemos que los que manejamos fondos no podemos hacerlo todo, y eso creo que es uno de los principales aprendizajes de organizaciones como Profonampe, que es bueno traer a estos espacios. Y es que hay organizaciones en el territorio que conocen muy de cerca a los beneficiarios y que te pueden reducir curva de aprendizaje. Con esta facilidad vamos a promover innovación con bionegocios eco-biobusiness. Y por el otro lado, a partir de estas oportunidades que se generan de innovaciones, tratar de movilizar capital de impacto. Y ahí también hay unas sinergias importantes sobre el rol que el Fondo Verde puede tener para este tipo de iniciativas. Básicamente, queremos 3 resultados: fortalecer la regulación. La segunda, promover y escalar 75 bionegocios y tener un espacio de confianza donde empresarios con mayor nivel de recursos puedan articularse con estos emprendimientos que normalmente no son visibles. ¿Y cuáles son los beneficios compartidos que logramos a partir de iniciativas como esta facilidad? Es incrementar la resiliencia de las comunidades a través de empleos verdes. Vamos a trabajar en la conservación y en servicios ecosistémicos. Podemos ayudar a la conservación de especies endémicas, también movilizar capital y generar un mayor ingreso para mejorar la calidad de vida. Y finalmente, dos beneficios colaterales que vamos a poder incorporar a través de iniciativas tipo estas, si son financiadas por el Fondo Verde, políticas que normalmente no se ven, tipo la política de género, tipo la política de salvaguardas indígenas y de pueblos originarios, ¿no? Y finalmente, contribuir al crecimiento profesional y a que los jóvenes se queden en el territorio. ¿Y de dónde conocimos a Segundo? ¿Y de dónde conocimos a Balbina? ¿Y de dónde hemos conocido a Gunther y a tantos otros? A través de un proyecto que es emblemático en el Fondo Verde y también para Profonam, que es construyendo la resiliencia de los humedales del Datem del Marañón. Este proyecto, el primero del Fondo Verde, se originó allá por el 2015 y finalmente empezó a implementarse en el 2017, y lo que busca es conservar o tener un manejo de más de 400,000 hectáreas que puedan servir para influenciar en los stocks de carbono de más de 234 toneladas, ¿no? Y hasta julio del 2021 acaban de aprobar el último reporte en el fondo, así que van a poder verlo también en el portal web del GCF, pero el proyecto ha beneficiado a más de 10,200 personas de más de 88 comunidades indígenas. Y quien está en la foto es Segundo. Segundo es un escalador que a partir del proyecto pudo identificar una oportunidad de mejorar su calidad de vida. Cuando el proyecto no existía, Segundo talaba las palmeras para conseguir aguaje cuando era temporada de agua. Y cuando no había aguaje, se metía al bosque y buscaba madera dura. ¿Para qué? Para venderla hacia los madereros. Y seguramente, si el proyecto no hubiera existido, Segundo hoy podría estar haciendo minería aluvial ilegal o podría estar trabajando en actividades ilegales como el narcotráfico. Es por eso que es importante que tengamos iniciativas y financiamiento que llegue al territorio, que llegue donde Segundo, que llegue donde Balbina, que llegue donde Tatiana, que está en otra región, y que les permita a ellos entonces, a partir del aprovechamiento sostenible del bosque, por un lado, mejorar su calidad de vida y por el otro, contribuir a esos objetivos que todos y todas queremos con el financiamiento climático, que es generar o promover la sostenibilidad de la vida en las condiciones que nosotros las conocemos. Eso les quería contar el día de hoy desde la experiencia del territorio y estamos seguros que aprender juntos nos va a llevar a tener mejores soluciones y escalar las que son buenas. Muchas gracias.
Anton, many thanks for the presentation. It's nice to hear Prof. Anampe's experience working with small businesses regarding territory and gender, and as well as youth. I'd like to make one clarification that the Amazon Eco Bio Business Facility is with us, and we understand it's going to the B34 happening next month. So we're wishing you all the best in the board meeting. Thank you. I think I'm actually gonna come sit there. Sorry, the remaining part is gonna be our panel discussion, so I wanted me to be close to you. All right. So I'd like to now open the floor for questions or comments or reflections that you may have to our speakers after they have made the presentation. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. I see a gentleman over there.
I'm sorry, I was just waiting for the microphone. I'd like to thank the speakers for this presentation, and I actually just wanted to make a couple of reflections around this new frontier called blue carbon. And it was interesting that it was put up there on the screen, because I think there's a number of countries that are asking things like, well, where is the market? Number one. If the market is under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, then we run into all sorts of issues around additionality and around corresponding adjustments. And I know they're technical terms, but I won't explain all that. But and then when we think about the voluntary market, we need to then start thinking about, how do you measure these things? And how do you verify these things? And in reality, we're only at the research stage, no matter what anybody says. Because in my experiences in this, we haven't been able to really, with certainty, understand what blue carbon really means to all of us. If we look at, so coral reefs are the forests of the sea. If we look at terrestrial forests under the Climate Convention, well and truly understood, methodologies have been developed, and as we heard, there's great potential and opportunity. I think we've poised ourselves, and the markets listen to us. We've poised ourselves for the private sector to leap in, cowboys and all. And the Pacific is one of those places where we are engaged with some of these initiatives. I think the key thing here to understand is who has the authority and who owns them, besides all of the other technical things. So these reflections just pose the question to you all, what actually, in the context that I'm giving it, which is the other end, the market end, what is the role of GCF? Can GCF actually facilitate a market-based mechanism as the private sector currently sees it, as climate investors, hedge funds see it, because they're the ones that are running around soliciting countries' interests. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your reflection and question.
Yeah, okay, so thank you for the question, and I think you know, it's great to what you posed to us is really great food for thought, and I think you're right on in terms of the continuous research that's still needed, and I would invite all of us to go back to my final slide where I presented gaps, and you know, there is definitely a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of the areas of general areas of MRV, and I certainly expect funding sources like GCF to continue to allow the world to enhance our understanding. So it's not just, you know, concessional financing, crowding in private sector financing that's required to just go into this white space like cowboy, as you said, and you know, make best out of it. We definitely need to strengthen our frameworks, policies, technical scientific understandings of corals, seagrasses, and mangroves. So we do need to sort of proceed or progress while with these two sort of wheels in mind. One is the potential for private sector financing to benefit from this quote unquote frontier, but also making sure that we're not going to over extract the finite and fragile ecosystems from this. So I'll finish this and ask Ben to respond to the question about the role of GCF.
Thank you very much, Yusuke, and thank you very much for this question as well. There's a lot to unpack in that question, right? And as you correctly point out, especially for GCF, this is, well, you know, for the international community more generally, this is a real frontier area, right? Traditionally, and you can see it in the way the result areas have been cut up at GCF. You have forest and land use. You don't have the term coastal ecosystems or oceans included in there, but because forest and land use is a mitigation result area, by default, blue carbon, although it's not necessarily only land, but it's also sea, falls into the forest and land use result area. So for us, it's a new frontier, and it's also something that's very promising that we want to be able to invest in. Why is that? Is that, well, scientific advances have shown in the last few years the tremendous sequestration and storage capacity, especially of coastal ecosystems. So, and that's where most of the blue carbon is today, right? Or at least where we understand it is, and where we can have an impact. At the same time, there remains some scientific uncertainty as to how much of that sequestration, how do we measure it? How do we verify it? How do we monitor it? Okay, so there's still some scientific uncertainty, and there's continuing research that's been developed in that direction. But at the same time, the private sector, the investors have pricked up their ears. Those investing in carbon markets now view blue carbon also as a new frontier, not only as a potential source of new carbon credits, but also building on the fact that it's not just carbon we're talking about. When we're talking about blue carbon, there's a tremendous array of co-benefits that come on top of just providing carbon per se. There's livelihoods, there's adaptation, enhancing resilience of coastal ecosystems. There's biodiversity. So, and that means that blue carbon credits could potentially fetch higher prices on carbon markets than green carbon, okay? So it's very promising. And the other thing to look at in terms of voluntary carbon markets is their explosion in the past 18 months. We've seen in 2021 in particular, carbon markets really take off, and with blue carbon added to that, it's something, basically it's an opportunity to crowd in private finance that we can't miss. Come back to the challenges, and Yusuke was very right in highlighting the challenges. There are challenges, there are scientific challenges that remain, but these are at least partially addressed through for example, Vera, which has already developed site-specific methodologies, and which is in the course of developing new methodologies to monitor, verify, and report on blue carbon, so that these ecosystems can generate carbon credits, which can be traded on voluntary markets, and maybe in the future as well through Article 6. Article 6 is still in the building, but we're looking at a fairly positive outlook, and it's very possible that within a few years we'll be able to benefit from blue carbon credits through Article 6 as well.
Thank you, Yusuke and Ben. I'd like to ask a question to Anton. This is a question for you. When you are working with small businesses, which financial instruments would you be looking at? Could you tell us maybe based on your experience, what has worked for you and what has not worked with you?
I will answer in Spanish, it's easier. Cuando hablamos de financiamiento para bionegocios y para emprendimientos basados en el bosque, la experiencia en el caso de Perú muestra que si solamente los evaluamos por la mirada financiera, lo más probable es que ninguno de ellos sea sostenible en el tiempo o en gran escala, ¿no? Sin embargo, eso tiene que ver con la tasa de interés que el mercado financiero está cobrando en el caso de Perú. El financiamiento concesional todavía no llega a ese usuario final. Sin embargo, cuando miras a los pequeños emprendimientos, a los bionegocios, no solamente por su evaluación financiera, sino también por el impacto social y ambiental de las iniciativas, claramente son iniciativas que uno debería alentar con un financiamiento de impacto o concesional. Y eso es lo que estamos validando en el proyecto de Datem del Marañón y esperamos continuar con la facilidad. Es que trabajar con poblaciones que están muy distantes de nodos comerciales, poblaciones que han estado desconectados de los mercados, requiere continuidad, requiere asistencia técnica permanente y requiere sobre todo desarrollo de capacidades. Y una vez que tienes esos tres elementos, son capaces de insertarse al mercado de una manera mucho más competitiva. Con un ejemplo concreto, quiero contarles el caso de Gunther. Gunther es un pescador de Musa Caruza, ¿no? Que 15 años atrás no hablaba castellano. Es decir, era un poblador, un ciudadano peruano de pleno siglo XX que no se insertaba en el lenguaje oficial del resto del país. Cuando empezamos a trabajar con Gunther, nos dimos cuenta de sus capacidades de liderazgo y de desarrollar sus ideas, y hoy, 15 años después de acompañarlo con asistencia técnica, con desarrollar tecnologías para su zona geográfica, de enseñarles modelos de negocio occidentales o de cómo insertarse con el mercado, hoy Gunther no necesita Profonamp. Hoy Gunther se conecta con el mercado financiero para prestarse capital de trabajo. ¿Eso qué significa? Que hay un montón de oportunidades, pero también hay la necesidad de un montón de actores que acompañen estos procesos de desarrollo. ¿Y por qué es importante trabajar con Gunther? Porque si no trabajamos con él, lo que va a suceder es que van a aparecer presiones de economías ilegales o economías dañinas a lo que buscamos como país y buscamos en realidad como humanidad, ¿no? Hay presiones de narcotráfico, hay presiones de minería ilegal, hay presiones simplemente de aspiraciones de bienestar. Y es bien difícil decirle a la persona en el campo que no degrade el bosque, que no deteriore los ecosistemas si su calidad de vida es precaria, ¿no? Entonces, necesitamos finalmente encontrar esos modelos de negocio. Creo que el proyecto de Datem del Marañón, el que trabajamos con el Fondo Verde, pero los otros también, nos muestran de que hay miles de Gunthers, hay miles de Balbinas, que lo que necesitan es ser identificado y tener, en esto sí voy a usar un anglicismo, tailor-made esquemas financieros. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Anton. I would like to take one more question from the floor, and I do apologize, we're running out of time, so please stop. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice presentation, informative really. I'm asking about the afforestation supply chain initiative, how to be linked with the carbon market and looking at the gaps as we in most developing countries, there is no national land use plans which are absent, and the challenge of land tenure and land ownership In this regard, we need policy reforms, regulation, and so on, so as to regularize the ownership of the land. Also, I am asking about the ecosystem services or the non-carbon benefits that how can be evaluated and calculated and inserted within such projects. For the eco biosystem facility, it is very nice and very important facility. And I am asking about the component 1 technical assistant and the Bureau of RED Plus framework. Also, if it is to be linked with the carbon market and which you call for result-based payment for RED Plus activities, and this is we have to be very ready or well prepared for this result-based payment to develop robust tailor monitoring system and also emission reference level and so on. So our technical capacities in this regard are far lag behind. We need more strength to upgrading for these capacities so as to have access to carbon markets. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Would Yusuke or Ben, would you like to take this question? Carbon markets and technical assistance to enable the investment.
Thank you very much for this question. Maybe I can answer on behalf of GCF. As you might know, the GCF has a readiness program available. And through the readiness program, we do provide support for planning and programming. So that will include land use planning. It will also include certain activities which are related to RED Plus readiness. We can also provide what we would traditionally call readiness activities when they are built into broader proposals that are part of the main funding window of GCF. So you can have a small component, a small first component that would be about planning and programming or readiness, and then that would be necessary for the implementation, for the feasibility of other activities that are part of that proposal. So definitely part of what the GCF would finance. I hope this answers your question.
So, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I do apologize that I see more hands up, but please do feel free to come approach us after this panel. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your presence, and especially the guest speakers, Ben, Yusuke, and Anton, for this enthusiastic discussion on forest and land use. And we look forward to working with all of you on potential projects. Thank you so much. Thank you.